Good morning and welcome to ITW 2023. This year's ITW is shaping up to be one of the best ever, and we'd like to thank all of you for coming. There's 5,800, more than 5,800 of you here today, representing 111 countries and over 1,800 companies. So it's one of the biggest ITWs ever, so thank you all for coming. I would especially like to thank all of our sponsors who make this event possible, especially our diamond sponsors, Bankai, Deutsche Telekom, STC, Telefonica Global Solutions, and Verizon. Since the last ITW, we've seen some major changes across our industry. From new metaverse and smart city solutions to the GLF's latency improvements for IoT, and a wave of new subsea and terrestrial fiber deployments. Even today, we've seen some huge announcements, from this morning's unmissable launch of Baobab in the GLF lounge, to today's news of the i3 Forum's fight to restore trust, China Telecom bringing the cloud to Brazil, and HGC, IGC, and AMSIC's launch of a new internet exchange point in Bangkok, and finally C&W's rebranding to Liberty Networks. With more announcements sure to follow throughout the week, now is a really exciting time for our rapidly evolving and digitizing industry. Before we hand over to the keynote speakers leading this evolution and change, I'd just like to draw everyone's attention briefly to our antitrust notice. If you have any questions around this, please feel free to ask any of the team. Brilliant. To kick off an exciting and new, if slightly complicated, keynote session, I'd like to invite Annabelle Helm to the stage, who's the director of the GLF. Annabelle.
Thank you, James. Good morning and welcome to ITW 2023. As James said, we are expecting us to be one of our most successful and impactful shows to date. So what are we doing now? We have the ITW Keynote Chat Show, which may or may not be described as an elaborate game of musical chairs. You will see why. We have an esteemed panel of true leaders across the industry. And over the course of the next 90 minutes, we're going to tell you a story. We're going to start off with where are we going? What are the investment trends? What do we need to do? We're going to move into what do we need to do as an industry in order to meet these trends. We're going to talk about customers. Who are we serving? How are they changing? What do they need? We're going to talk about network transformation. What do we need to do as an industry to get there? And we're going to finish with who do we need to deliver on all of this promise? What people are required? And we were delighted to launch our Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging report. So, without further ado, I am going to invite Jonathan and Elisabetta onto the stage. Unfortunately, Mark Ganzi sends his apologies. He was called away at the last minute. Good morning, welcome. Sorry, technical issues. Challenge with the keynote being the first session of the day. I'm sure it'll be perfect by the end. So, Jonathan, Elisabetta, set the scene for us from a macroeconomic perspective. As it relates to the digital infra sectors, what is the state of play right now, Jonathan?
Well, there's a need for massive investment in digital infrastructure at a time when there's a lot of strain and headwinds in the economy, and carriers are competing on quality, they're competing on coverage at a time when 5G is extremely expensive to deploy. They spend an enormous amount on spectrum that they're now spending even more to deploy the infrastructure on. And yet 5G hasn't resulted in new revenue streams yet to accommodate the additional capital investment that's been required. So I think what we're seeing is the need for large infrastructure companies. I represent Digital Bridge, who is an investment manager that, for example, works with our partners in the carriers to help them using our ability to raise funds and low cost of capital to help meet those very demanding infrastructure needs. We expect that there's going to be $400 billion annually needed worldwide to build digital infrastructure. This is an enormous undertaking as data it grows, and we all have been talking about that. That's been a tailwind for the entire industry for some time. But in order to keep up with that demand, it requires enormous investments. And so, for example, I see Rolf here from Deutsche Telekom. We did a deal with Deutsche Telekom in Germany with Brookfield to basically an $18 billion deal to acquire 51% stake in their towers. They could then use the proceeds of those funds not only to take a majority stake in U.S. T-Mobile, which had, by the way, Deutsche Telekom just reported some very good news on that front today in terms of earnings, but also then to invest in their network in Europe. So it makes sense for the hard infrastructure to be funded by those like Digital Bridge and Brookfield and others that are investing in these networks so that the carriers can invest in their network and improve the quality of service to the consumer. I think that's the trend we're going to see increasingly, particularly in this era of high inflation and the demands that are just outstripping sort of the revenues that are coming with the 5G networks.
Elizabeth, so outline the specific headwinds from Tim, or tailwinds. You know, you look after the international and the domestic network. What are you seeing, and how are you planning to meet these headwinds?
Yes, I would like to start from where he left. So that is about the revenues, because the fact that we have to do investment, that is a brutal truth, and huge investment. Then how much we monetize compared with what to invest, that is really the question mark. You know, I keep saying every time I speak on the fact that telcos in general, the industries, do not monetize for what we deserve, for what we do it. So that's I think is an industry issue that we have not solved yet, and we need to look at 2030 and try to understand how we can really find our sweet spot and monetize according to it. So, and again, of course, we have challenges on revenues, but at the same time, yet another disruptive technology is coming. So we are talking about 5G. We are talking about 10 giga FTTH, and then we talk about new use cases, and then we talk about network transformation, because in order to be ready for the 2030, we must transform, and you know, the automation and cloudification. I mean, I can mention so many things we must do it in order to cope with you know, the tomorrow's telco requirements. And that's, again, to do more with less, because we have our, challenges in price pressure. And if we think about Europe, of course, you know, it's even more than in the other geographies. So I think that the point that we need as an industry coming together, because that is an industry issue, is really to, you know, to transform, because speed and agility is a must. So transformation is not optional, but we must find really the way where we can monetize much better than we have done in the last 10, 15 years.
Jonathan, is that something that you're talking through with your portfolio companies, doing more with less? Is that a similar headwind that you're facing?
This one's not working. Yeah, we really need to be very careful about how we allocate capital. Right now, capital is extremely valuable because there's such a contraction in the economy. It's very difficult to raise funds right now. So those with capital have all kinds of great opportunities. We're actually raising money in the market right now successfully. We just announced a major fundraising success in the last quarter, and we are able then to very carefully deploy that. I think that, you know, valuations have not yet come down commensurate with, I think, the headwinds in the economy that you talked about in terms of interest rates and inflation. People, it's like when you're selling a house and they used to be really expensive and market comes down, you still want the same old price for your house. That's what we're seeing with certain assets, and we're not willing to do that. We're using extreme discipline to be extremely judicious, because we think that those with capital, as the market gets more and more difficult, are going to have access to some incredible opportunities but we have to be very, very careful about how we deploy that. And in particular, we owned a lot of assets here in the United States, for example, Zayo and Extenet. These are assets we bought, when multiples were lower, and they've come up since then. But right now, trying to deploy capital, I think we need to see valuations that are reasonable for the kind of return our investors expect.
We've seen a trend, right, of the integrated telcos separating, carving out assets. Is that something that you're expecting to continue? Is there going to be consolidation? What do you see in the next 12 months, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think that the trend of the layering or a separation between NetCo, ServCo in the different flavor is going to be a trend that will stay with us in the industries for many years. So we see already some of them that are doing it. So I think that even in this conference we have seen some spin-off of maybe network, wholesale market, and so on. So I think it's a trend. Why I think is a trend? So, and I'm speaking as being in these industries for many years, is because the different, what you do it from network or from a services perspective, there are key drivers that are different. So one of that is skill. So you need completely different skill to do, from a network perspective than from a service co perspective. And the industry has been changing so much in the last 20 years. So, for you, like me, that we were in the industry 20 years working in the industry, there was mainly voice and SMS, and was all embedded with a network. So not too much to do on top. Of course, pricing was important. But now, we look at what a telco should do it. We should be, of course, able to look at the new technologies, 5G. Like I say, it's a new FTTH technology, and then cloud, and then from a technology perspective. But then from a services perspective as well, we talk about IoT, all the new 5G use cases. We talk about cyber security. We talk about blockchain, all the digital services. So that is a huge reskilling and upskilling topics. Yesterday at the GLF board, we were talking about this. So that is completely reskilling, and is different from who is driving the network from who is doing services. Also because it's different from a time frame perspective, because it needs to happen in the different time frame. And then also the business model. So business model, can be definitely different. And the way to attract, to find for investment sources, because again, we need to invest huge money for all these new technologies. So there is also a different way to look for investment source if you are in the network side or in the services side. So this is a trend, is already happening, and I think we will see more and more in the coming years.
I'd agree that trend is going to continue, particularly because there's so much investment now. I think there's been a recognition that digital infrastructure as a separate asset class is very consistent in terms of its returns, given the tailwinds of massive increases in data, that it's a fairly safe investment. So we've seen a lot of money poured in. Digital infrastructure was something my boss actually coined, Mark Ganzi, who could be here today, but 10 years ago, nobody knew what that class was. And now we have entire funds dedicated to it, raising a lot of money at a fairly low cost of capital. So I think the point is that the market values this infrastructure in particular at a higher multiple if it's in the hands of private equity firms that have raised money for that specific purpose than they do in the hands of carriers. So carriers over the years have tended to disaggregate that, to move their infrastructure where it's valued higher, and then to invest in their network where they get the returns by having a greater market share competing on quality and on their network.
Thank you. So at this stage, we're going to have our first game of musical chairs, and I'm going to invite Bedrama and Chris onto the stage. You've heard the conversation to date, and I'm excited to hear your perspective. So, Elaine, let's start with you. what's the Asian context in relation to this whole integrated telco separation carve-out piece?
So, first of all, good morning, everyone. Nice to be here. Thank you, Annabelle, for inviting me. Before I go into the deep dive into Asian context, let me just give a little bit of an overview as what's happening over there. Just to give a kind of a context to it from my perspective, I represent Axiata that has digital telcos, fintech business, infrastructure business as well. That was being talked about earlier. And then, digital businesses on advertising and labs too. So, different perspective on not only the MNO part, but, across the whole thing. Starting from Asia as a whole, first thing that has basically come out is that most of the nations, if not all, have pledged to going digital. So the digital agenda is quite high. There's a general pledge of economic diversification, and that really helps in terms of, telcos, who are working in there. If you talk about innovation, research, things that Elisabetta was talking about earlier, most of those things are basically, just bringing up, growing locally, 5G, IoT, fintech in general. Talking about fintech, Asia has become a kind of a hotbed when it comes to micropayments, when it comes to mobile wallet, when it comes to super app. Even, on the other side, on the innovation, if you look at cloudification and AI, machine learning, it's all on the uprise, which doesn't seem from the outside. In terms of what do you call the major challenges, not major challenges, let me just focus more on the tailwinds first, and then we can go on to the challenges. If you look at the population over there, obviously, about 60% of the population over there, there is poverty elevation happening, there's digital literacy happening, there's digital penetration happening. How it's converting. So, when digital literacy goes up, which is happening at this point in time, there are more online users coming in. Recent statistics show that in Asia alone, there are more users coming online compared to the rest of the world. So, there's an upsurge in terms of, how things are basically moving over there. The middle class primarily is growing as well, meaning that, that digital economic pool that we have is kind of, swelling up. There's more activity happening over there. So, if you look at all these indicators, it seems like, there are a lot of tailwinds, which there are. But there are certain other elements that basically, bring a different flavor to the Asian context. One thing I want to basically mention here is the productivity part. So despite the fact that, you have digital enablers being embedded into the whole ecosystem, the productivity growth has slowed down. And obviously, it starts from the pandemic days. The economies have resuscitated, revitalized, rejuvenated, but the scars are still there. So, most of the markets where we operate, there's a labor surplus, right? Predominantly, it used to be unskilled labor who used to go out, emigrate, send money back home, but that model is, fast changing, with all the things that I was mentioning earlier around digital penetration, the service uptake. There's a highly skilled labor pool now sitting over there that needs to be basically made more productive. And the main challenge over there right now is that from an infrastructure perspective, we are still, way behind. We are not talking about basic connectivity. Basic connectivity is there. Like when you talk about connecting the unconnected, most of the telcos have kind of, lived to that promise. But it's more about, high speed, low latency, getting closer to the customer. Those are things that are still, a little bit, needs a little bit of attention, in general. And I'm sure, Jonathan can basically vouch as well, given their investments in most of our markets. So if I zoom out, now if you look at from a macroeconomic perspective, obviously, there are all these indicators that show tailwinds, but obviously there are some macro headwinds as well. Geopolitical scenario is something that is really driving the whole region down, whether we like it or not, from a digital infrastructure perspective, we don't know whom to work, where to work. There are seismic shifts happening within the region. So it's not that, that economic pool is going somewhere else. It's within the region, but it shifts from one country to the other and makes, very difficult for, telcos like us to, decide as, what are the long-term aims in terms of, where do we invest. Similarly, there is a lot of, I wouldn't call it uncertainty, but a little bit of vagueness around the regulatory policies across the whole board. I can start off, with the market where I reside at this point in time, Malaysia. I'm sure, the audience over here would have been following. Capacity Media has been reporting on the single wholesale network over there. But, it has been a kind of a conundrum over there. Fine, there was a stance taken. They started rolling it out, but, with a change of guard, it has been kind of, washed over. And the whole ball game has changed. So again, in terms of, longevity, in terms of long-term planning, in terms of, looking at, what's next, there's a lot of, vagueness over there. Again, another example I can quote is in Bay of Bengal, where from a regulatory standpoint, they opened up the market in terms of, investing in subsea cables. However, what happened was when you look deeper, and we looked into that as well, there were certain, I would say, nuances which basically inhibit or deter and for a foreign investor into go into these markets, despite the fact the licenses are being given. So, these are things, and obviously, needless to say, if you look at the monetary and fiscal policies, they are not that conducive, meaning the cost of capital goes up. Again, Jonathan, you were looking at, you were basically looking at it from a different perspective, but when you have elevated inflationary pressures in the market already, supply chain issues, the local currency is devaluing, and then, the cost of capital is going up, the whole business plan changes. And it's changing, on quarter to quarter for us. So, in a nutshell, if you look at, the local indicators from an Asian context perspective, absolutely amazing. It's a growing market. And, like I've been there for about 3 years now, worked in different continents. The context that Asia brings in is entirely different. From a digital infrastructure perspective, one thing, that I've particularly noticed is that it's not only a social dependence. They don't have a social dependence on digital infrastructure. There's a high economic dependence on terms of developing and bringing in the digital infrastructure. But again, with all the macro challenges, we are faced with certain headwinds that we have to basically, work through.
Thanks. So that was a whistle-stop tour of tailwinds and headwinds across Asia. So we had regulation, geopolitics, fragmentation at a country level. I mean, a lot to unpack there. Chris, you occupy a slightly different part of the digital infra world. Are you facing similar tailwinds and headwinds, and how are you investing to meet those challenges?
No, absolutely appreciate it. Happy to be here. If you think about like what we're talking about today is the revenues, the capital market, and what set the infrastructure up, where the investments have been, I think you have to go really slow into what was the use case, right? And I think we'd be remiss not to look at what established the infrastructure, which is cloud. Cloud was the #1 driver of what we've benefited from in, how facilities came online, how networks were built, how data centers were built, just the deluge of data that's been created. We're beyond the zettabyte era and we continue to grow. A lot of that is built around what we classify as cloud. And I think one of the things that, if we're talking about what's going to shape the future, if you look at one of the biggest use cases today, which will again, quite frankly, shape how we invest, the infrastructure that comes to market and the timing of it coming to market, is artificial intelligence. If we don't, as all the leaders in this room at this conference, go very slow on exactly what that means and how the analytical models that are coming out every week and the pace at which they're coming out and the interconnection and, quite frankly, the infrastructure required to make them successful, you're going to miss out on an opportunity, right? Where I think we constantly look at being balanced in the way we bring our capital to market and being extremely aligned to our customers. And I think the customer set is going to change rather drastically. I think the infrastructure requirements are going to change drastically. And one of the things that we look at is always around, from a data center perspective, the power density and the interconnectivity associated with that. And so you can't align ahead of the power density because you will strain capital, but you have to align with the customer set, and we see AI as being additive to the cloud, where you're going to see different types of applications and infrastructures come to market, but the interconnectivity and the networks and the services and the capital required, it's going to be demonstrable in the market. And so we at Digital Realty and my team in bringing the products and aligning those customers, it's a true differentiator for us. And I think the last piece I'll give you is software. Right, we've seen software be disruptive in so many markets where the SaaSification of every vertical is continuing to evolve. You're going to see AI and some of these new models come out with the intelligence that will make the infrastructure transparent. And what I mean by that is the fact that you will have applications starting to depict the interconnectivity and where the workload will reside, and that will be spun up on a very virtual basis, where you're going to see drastic changes in what we have to do as a community to support this evolution of how this software is going to be coming to market. So very exciting time.
Can I add something? So the use cases, because this is a never-ending story. You know, few years back, there was 5G. Okay, all the use cases, 5G use cases that will drive network and so on. To be honest, we have not seen yet these use cases. And then there was a period of metaverse, and then, okay, metaverse, and that's the use case that will, you know, move everything. Now is AI, or even more generative AI, because that's a new word, and then we don't know yet what is going to be, so that is very difficult to be aligned with the use cases based on the experience. The only things we know it is that data connectivity, is growing and growing. So even without any use cases, and unfortunately any use cases that help carriers, telco, to monetize, sorry to be very, insisting on this point, we have to invest because technology needs to be there and data traffic is growing, and subsea cable, we need subsea cable. So that's really tough.
Right. And that's true, right? Demand is never going to be a challenge that we face as an industry. It's how we invest and monetize and create value. That's where we need to focus and figure it out. So before everybody joined, I asked them to share their top prediction for the next 12 months. Chris, you've teed us up very nicely, as there is a lot of AI predictions here. Jonathan, I'm afraid you're going to have to pretend to see what Mark said and unpack it, but talk us through. So AI will create 3 times more demand on power and DC capacity over the next 10 years. You know, what does that mean, and how are you thinking at it?
So I'm going to read Mark's mind here. I'm pretty sure I know what he's thinking, which is that there is going to be such an incredible demand in terms of the data creation by AI, but maybe that's the use case. Maybe it's right in front of us that AI is going to drive enormous amounts of data demand. It's very good news for us in the digital, for you, Chris, for us that have data centers. You can't build data centers fast enough to keep up with this demand. I mean, right now what we're seeing is that we're getting a little bit of ability on pricing, a little bit more leverage, because it is harder for self-performing because of interest rates, that they're now, as we said earlier, the same trend of offloading that to companies that have maybe a lower cost of capital, or at least have the ability to put this to work for investors, as opposed to having it run by the companies themselves. I mean, the tailwinds are enormous. And another issue is the power. The power demands, as we know, are very high on data centers. And that's one of the major constraints right now, where we need to put data centers, is to find sufficient power. So again, a constraint on the ability to keep up with this incredible explosion of data from AI. It's also going to move, I think, more data centers to the edge. not only will hyperscale, I think all data centers are going to grow, both hyperscale and mid-scale and edge, because we're going to need, with that enormous computing power, to have more computing power at the edge in order to meet consumer demands for instantaneous kind of relief. And on top of that, finally for 5G, with the ability to have more devices connected and the lack of latency, I think that AI is going to feed into that. Now, it's going to mean more demand. Does that mean necessarily the carriers monetize? I'm not sure about that.
We must.
We must. We obviously all of us want to see that desperately.
Right.
That's an open question how AI works. Certainly, it's going to be difficult for existing dominant companies to be able to maintain their dominant position, as I think there's more competition that comes from AI. But the beneficiaries, certainly one beneficiary that no doubt we can be sure of are digital infrastructure providers, because it can take a lot more digital infrastructure to keep up with the kind of increases in demand and power that we are going to see.
Chris, do you bear that out? You also predicted software AI. How are you looking at it?
Yeah, one of the things, like why I go back to the customer and the use case is it's extremely important to stay aligned to their requirements. And to your point, edge, Meta, there's a lot of noise around that, and quite frankly, we always really looked at what is the actual use case that's going to pay for the infrastructure. What's different about artificial intelligence is you can see the specific demands that are across every vertical, and that's going to impact pretty much every aspect of our professional and personal lives. Like, don't go slow with this. Really go in a very pragmatic fashion to understand the requirements associated with what it means to bring artificial intelligence, be it generative, be it any of these new large language models. It is something that has demonstrable requirements today. We look at it in our pipeline of not only data center demand, but where the actual connectivity has to reside. And I think, Jonathan, you said a point that's interesting to us is we are looking at the fact that in the training of these models, it's tremendous GPU farms with a tremendous amount of data that resides in proximity to existing cloud data. That's something we see today, and we see it continually growing. But once the model is created, there's inferencing, and where that's placed at the edge could be in our pocket, on our phones, in our laptops. So I don't know, how it's going to play out in the longer term, but the fact that you're going to have to really continually train these models and understand the data sets required to feed them, because simplistically, your AI model is only as smart as the data sets you feed it, and the quicker you can feed it and make it actionable, the more value you get out of that. It's a huge precipice for our industry. I look at it as a tailwind, right? There are some headwinds around power, but there's a lot we're doing around being green and bringing microgrids to market, but you're going to see a lot of the market continually be shaped by the services that our consumers and our customers are going to require, right? It is going to be a prerequisite to have a more intelligent software experience than has ever been seen before. And so that's where, we look and I see some of the stuff that you had talked about with APIs. That's the fundamental building blocks of where we see how the AI and the disruptive software is starting to consume this infrastructure.
Right, and we had this conversation yesterday in the GLF board meeting. We ran a survey a few weeks ago for funds, towercos, carriers, and we asked them, at what point do you think edge is going to become an asset class? The answer was, at some point before 2030, right? So we don't really know what the edge is. We know that there's an opportunity. We know that we can create value there. We know that connectivity is going to play a major role in that endpoint to endpoint, seamless delivery of our services. Elizabeth, you're kind of talking around this from an API perspective,
Yes, because I think that the layering, the network delayering that will be discussed in many markets will bring opportunities. And here, a lot of us are in a wholesale business, and the opportunities will be to work, to transform and have open networking, API, to standardize API as much as we can, north, south, east, west, and then working on platform business model. So this is, again, transformation is not optional. I think that the layering give us, a boost to go into this transformation. So on the API, platform business model, and open networking. Then, of course, AI will be there. So I hope that AI on top of the use cases, will help us to transform faster. So our operational transformation that we need in order to get the opportunity of the delayering, so AI can help us to do leapfrog in our transformation. But that's, is a way to, of course, be positive paranoid, because we need to be paranoid regarding monetization, what's next and so on, what is our tomorrow's telco. But then we need, of course, to be positive to find what is really the opportunities.
Right, and Abed, you raised satellite in your prediction, and that is an important piece of the puzzle. How is LEO impacting you in Asia?
So can I speak about the first part? First of all, it has been slightly changed.
Only because I like you.
Yeah, because I wrote delayering in general. It says network delayering, but anyways, the main point here that I was trying to allude to is that, this whole telco to techco transition that we are going through. It doesn't mean that, you need to delay the network, which we've seen, in terms of DC carve-outs that, telcos have done. But I think, the main question that begs an answer is that, what's the role of a telco going forward after this delayering? As you can, I'm sure, the statistics are out there, about 70% of the value pool now sits outside a telco. So I think, by delayering and, just carving out our businesses, be it enterprise, be it wholesale, be it consumer, then, a network, and network can be infraco, netco, whatever. There's a general trend emerging, but I think, there are early signs in Asia that, not only from a valuation perspective, there is a kind of an innovation win and an efficiency win as well. So, that's a key element that I wanted to highlight over here. Now, moving swiftly towards satellite, again, given our geography, or if you look at Asia, the topography over there, the terrain over there, it is challenging. Giving example of Nepal, there's no way we can basically cover the whole landmass over there. And that's where I think, and again, another example I can give is Indonesia. Just quoting some statistics, there are 62 million SMEs in a market, fourth most populous country in the world. But if you look at internet penetration in the urban markets, 90%. In rural, 10%. Yes, literacy counts, but then, it's about, how the network is being set out. So I think, and we strongly feel that, satellite communication would basically help, narrow that digital divide. But, the big question is at the right price point. There needs to be affordability in there as well.
Perfect. And I'm afraid it's time to move on our next game of musical chairs. So please join me in thanking Elisabetta and Jonathan. Thank you. If you take your microphones. Abed and Chris, move up. And Rolf and Emmanuel, please join us on the stage. Let's talk customers, right? Because they're who we're serving. You're both doing a huge amount across your networks and product portfolios to meet these changing customer requirements. What are your key focus areas? Rolf, what is do or die for tomorrow's telco for you?
First of all, do or die is a strong statement, yeah. But maybe you're right. Yeah, one of our board members once said, "Only the paranoid survive." And I think this is very much true in our industry. We must be extremely paranoid about our business models, because when we talk about competition, we are of course competing between us, but we also have a strong and tough competition with the hyperscalers who are owning a real global backbone, who really have global distribution of their data centers, who are really cloud native and are also extremely customer centric. So from my perspective, we must, of course, create global connectivity with end-to-end quality. Sounds like a no-brainer, but we don't have it. Yeah? All we do is currently best effort. We are throwing connectivity across the fence, and then another carrier is picking it up. So it must be end-to-end service quality. Extremely important. The other topic we are working on is, of course, also a no-brainer. It's automation. And automation of the full value chain starting from quoting, provisioning, billing, settlement. If we look into that, yes, we are doing a lot, but we are not fast enough. Yeah, and this is the third topic we need to embrace. It's very much speed, coming from being monolithic, coming from being very much aggregated service provisioning, to be much more flexible, much leaner, much faster. So these are the three main topics I see that we need to tackle to survive.
Emmanuel, would you agree with that? What does as a service mean to you at Orange?
Yeah, I will fully agree with what Rolf has just said, and I think that if we talk about customers, what we see is that the critical thing we need to deliver is the convergence of customer experience between cloud and connectivity, and that's where the network as a service play comes into the game. Our customers cannot understand, and less that they need only minutes to order and have delivered a virtual machine on any cloud, and that for a connectivity link it takes weeks or months. So that's our key challenges, and what is required to do that is four things. One is transform our network. And transforming our networks is coming back to what has been discussed in the previous session, is delayering, softwareization, virtualization, automation. And that's the first thing. The second thing is to automate all our business processes with APIs so that they can be orchestrated. The third one is the customer interface, so be digital, have a simple, very simple and digital experience end-to-end for all the customers. And the final one is skills, because we need to achieve the network as a service promise. We need to get the skills from a pure network where we come to more IT and network together.
Chris, are you seeing similar changes from customer requirements with you? How are you investing in your product portfolio to meet those changes?
No, absolutely. I think it's something that's important, right? That's why I had to start with the customer. I think that's one of the critical pieces. And one of the elements that I think you had said, Rolf, like the cloud was a demonstrable changing point in our industry. If we remember back, there's this cloud a friend or foe. How's it going to evolve? And you really had to be a bit paranoid, but you had to also get down to the facts of how was it going to evolve, right? Where they've built their own backbone, they've built their own data centers, but there's this interconnection point where there's a tremendous amount of value being created as a multi-tenant operator. And I think one of the important pieces we look at is there's not only cloud, and I think it's a great reference, as a service, right? Where either you're creating an as a service or you're consuming it. And that was a big multiplier effect we saw in the industry on the addressable market growing rather exponentially. And I'll harp on this a little bit, and then I'll get some negative comments about it. But we see the next generation of a lot of these algorithms, or said differently, AI, that's going to be another driving factor that not only the infrastructure required to do the compute and the data being created, but who is the addressable market for that capability? It's going to continually grow, right? And I think, we saw the software developers being a core component of how cloud evolved, and then the SaaSification. That was a massive step in addressable market. But now we see some of these AI programs and in small models, where it's not even the large language models, it's these medium models that are open sourced becoming rather disruptive. But the addressable customer to that is massive, right? There's not many verticals, not many customers. We don't see a derivative in a particularly short time, and this is where it gets a bit less data driven, but the time to market for disruption around AI depended upon the vertical. There's some is here and now, but there's some that are the other, and we constantly watch that balance. But how the customer is going to be enabled is going to change, right? Like there's probably not anybody in this room thinking about a ChatGPT type customer-based service model where you can go in and either have a vocal dialogue or a text-based dialogue, but that's the here and now. And I think a lot of the networks that we look at accessing in a very transparent manner through these APIs, that's table stakes. It's the next step of how do we not only achieve that transparency, but I think, just to reiterate your point, the SLA all the way to the end. to that end consumer, so that we become as transparent as possible, so that the applications can make the best decisions based upon business requirements.
Right, and Obaid, you talked a little bit earlier about the role of digital infrastructure in closing the digital divide, connecting the unconnected. On the retail side, obviously, that's a different customer base. Are you seeing demands in Asia for this as a service, on demand, always on type environment, and how are you looking at that?
So, very good point that you brought up, Annabelle. Compared to other parts of the world, Asia has a certain uniqueness. And the uniqueness is in the heterogeneity of markets. You have mature markets with higher GDP, and then you have poor markets, obviously with low GDP, not that great in infrastructure. So there's a huge disparity in terms of the infra build. So if I talk about some leading markets within our part, I think what Emmanuel was saying becomes relevant. Everything as a service. What you were talking about when it comes to artificial intelligence, machine learning, good 5G deployment, and better capital deployment as well, better partnerships. Digital players gravitate into these markets as well. So there's this one set of these players or these markets, but on the flip side, you have markets where there's a dire need of digital infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier. But then, given a typical business case, doesn't make sense to basically just plow in a lot of dollars in there, and then you're struggling, just to basically bring them up. Very unique situation, but again, there's a geographical proximity amongst all these markets. And I think, in terms of, bringing in that equality, we at Axiata have taken a kind of a different approach. We are trying to basically create a homogeneous ecosystem in a heterogeneous market, meaning that, wherever it makes sense, we take it, get a return on investment, return on capital, but use that to basically serve through, creating synergies, cross-border, deployments to, bring that market which can't afford in terms of digital infrastructure, up. Certain elements have to be deployed there, but most of the things beyond connectivity can be done, centrally across the whole region, and that's the approach that we've taken.
Thank you. And I mean, all of this feeds in really nicely. So last year, the GLF published a report called the Tomorrow's Telco. This is just a really tiny snapshot of it, but where we'd started with the network before, and what we needed to do from a network perspective in order to meet use cases from requirement driven by customers. So we boiled this down into 11 capabilities and requirements. Emmanuel, Rolf, you were both instrumental in the drafting of this paper. Of these 11, Rolf, which are you focusing on first? Where are you focused from a Deutsche Telekom perspective? And what would your message be to those who haven't started their journey yet? Where should they start?
From my perspective, the biggest change that we are facing is the softwareization. And this is driving, of course, the need for end-to-end security services. So there must be a very, very strong focus on security, because I mentioned the disaggregation of our networks, the softwareization. So this is, of course, key that we implement security end-to-end. And for this, of course, we also need new know-how. We have at Deutsche Telekom the so-called TSEC department, so a huge department specialized on security with great expertise. And this expertise is valuable for all divisions of Deutsche Telekom. We need that, and they are so good because they are also protecting parts of the services for the government. So security is key. And another topic is, of course, to be network agnostic. Network agnostic for me means that in 2, 3, 4 years from now, our customers are not ordering any more fixed or mobile. They're not ordering any more MPLS or SD-WAN or 4G, 5G. They are ordering a specific service of connectivity. And we must go into this direction that we are able to provide contextual connectivity. And contextual connectivity for me is the key where we have to lay the focus on, which goes along with being network agnostic.
And Emmanuel, you talked about your journey to cloud-native architectures. From these 11, what do you need to do now? Yes, yes, or yes, right? How you can't say all of them.
I think that with the connectivity as a service and connectivity on demand, we will see a strong, very strong increase of transactions in our industry, in our businesses, and we need to cope with these increase of volumes with our business processes, which are still a lot manual. So we need to transform all our business processes, from the network to the delivery to the billing to everything we need to do to run connectivity business in order to be able to cope with these volumes. So that requires to automate, simplify, and of course to APIs are all our IT in order to be able to orchestrate everything, the network and all the processes behind and deliver a smooth experience to our customers.
And that's an interesting point, right? I mean, so from Chris, we talked earlier, demand is not a challenge. There is data. People are always going to want it. That creates challenges from a data gravity perspective. You know, how are you thinking about that at Digital Realty?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, I think the common theme that we've been talking about today is being a platform and what it means to be a platform and a bit of network neutrality, right? Where you have to allow our customers to access in the most efficient way possible the right route or the right destination to whatever they're trying to enable. And that was what data gravity was all about. Where is data being created? Where is data being stored? And where are you doing the analytics against that data? That's a big underpinning that I think a lot of our customers overlook, where they start to define their architecture without thinking about how the data is going to evolve in that overall life cycle. And so, you know, one of the things we always have looked at is providing as much of an efficient platform as possible in every major global market and working with the network operators to allow that interconnectivity in an extremely seamless fashion. And I think that's where the key driver for us bringing a product to market called Service Fabric is it's a software first environment that really removes the technical barriers to consume the APIs and allow a very transparent access mechanism to either the cloud or multiple destinations in multiple markets, or as we see this entrance into the market, these AI GPU compute farms, right? Like there's a lot of activity happening around that, but definitely a lot of demand, and you know, we're very cognizant of the return on capital. And so the ecosystems you create of either the buyer or the seller, we're highly focused on that to make sure that we support that right environment going forward.
Thank you. And when we look at all of these requirements, Obaid, will these help close the digital divide? You know, how can we close the digital divide if we are always on?
You know, while Chris was talking, you know, I was just reflecting back on ecosystems and, you know, what has worked in the past. And just had a flashback. 25 years back, you know, we created roaming collectively. And if you look at the roaming ecosystem, you know, it just worked seamlessly from the get-go. You know, we had a few issues. I'm not going to basically talk about what happened last year while we were here and we couldn't make calls. But other than that, you know, everything has been just perfect in terms of, you know, delivery of a service, you know, which to me is like a zero-touch service that we created ages back. You could walk into a mom-and-pop shop, pick up a SIM card, you know, put it in, go to the furthest part of the world and still, you know, roam. The basic essence over there at that point in time was standardization. Right? Now, if I come 25 years on, absolutely, you know, I think the canvas has been laid, the blueprint is there, we know what needs to be done. I think the proof is in the pudding in terms of how we execute it. right? Again, that trick question that you ask Emmanuel is what's important, what's not. I think, everything is important on a serious note. Again, the main idea, the basic thing that we are trying to address here is, again, zero touch. And again, not to one segment or one sector. It basically means across the board, across the whole spectrum, sorry. It can be a digital nomad sitting by the beach, trying to connect, or it can be a small business in an urban environment trying to basically digitalize their business. Or on the extreme end of the spectrum, hyperscalers trying to, serve the masses within a certain geography. The end-to-end capability should be similar for all these different, kind of use cases. Now, what's happening is obviously, we were talking about it earlier as well during the GLF board. We saw, certain companies presenting, what they've done. So there's a lot of good work happening. Actually, if you look at Axiata, we've done a similar thing as well. We have an open API model. We have more than 90 APIs already, opened up. If I remember correctly, more than 10,000, applications running off of it. So we are part of, that whole open platform mantra. But again, everything has to come together. We, as I said, we saw a couple of, initiatives being touted yesterday. I think next level is, or next wave is federation, syndication, collaboration to just, basically make it happen.
And that's where we're going to end for this game of musical chairs. Obaid, Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Emmanuel and Rolf, if you would like to take that with you. And I would like at this point to welcome Maria and Eric onto the stage. Thank you for joining this experiment that James has made us do this morning at the ITW chat show. So we're going to delve a little deeper into how you're thinking about network transformation to meet those customer demands. Eric, Verizon's invested heavily into its network to enable and support different use cases. Where are the priority investment areas for you? And crucially, where are you going to get the ROI from that CapEx?
All right, very fair question, Annabelle, and glad to be here as well with the group. I think the biggest conversation as I look at the capital investments from a Verizon standpoint, we're put about $20 billion of investment in the network every single year, just as a normal course of doing business. But on top of that $20 billion, we invested another $53 billion in our C-band and 5G spectrum that we just brought on board. And just to make certain we could deliver 5G quicker, we put another $10 billion out to really say, how do you accelerate the implementation of that over the 3-year period? So quick math on that would tell you about $120 billion of investment over a 3-year period of time from a capital investment standpoint. Once again, betting on connectivity for the future. Second part of your question, Annabelle, is kind of like that return on investment, because, I could love to spend money, but it's just as important to make sure as an industry, we're all seeing some return on our investments at the end of the day. So as we look at that investment, and just use the example of the $20 billion I do every year outside of what we put in the 5G and C-band, is really continue to invest in the wireline network itself. We continue to believe our services such as Ethernet, big strategic high bandwidth type service arrangements to us as a business. But beyond that, what are we doing on our internet side of the business? So what are we doing on the wave side of the business? We know wave alone is about a 4.8% CAGR growth. So how do you leverage that in the wireline space and not give up on wireline? Because we continue to believe that wireline is important to the industry at the end of the day. At the same time, we clearly understand there's a need for catch products to make certain you can make that investment return even faster. So we have put a lot of that investment on what we call fixed wireless access. And it's basically our business internet play to say, how do we deal with fixed mobile as an opportunity? It's a great catch product in the industry, particularly as you're moving off of, say, POTS service, TDM migration is taking forward. What do you do to capture that movement from TDM and POTS replacement? So we think this is a big opportunity for us, but take it even further to look at special access, DS1s, DS0s, across the board. As you look at the evolution of those products and technology from a wireline standpoint, how do you care from that on our wireless side of our product portfolio? So we're excited about what we're doing with fixed wireless access. We've seen something like 50 to 60,000 a month of new fixed wireless access services. So the reality on that return on investment has become very real for us, Annabelle. And then on top of that, wireless staying in that swim lane is what we're seeing from an IoT standpoint. Connections, tremendous double-digit billions of addressable opportunity for connections from an IoT standpoint. So we're continuing to see good growth on that. So wireline, I told you, swim lane, return on investment. Wireless swim lane, what can we do, particularly with the movement from TDM and POTS and other special access services? And the third area, Annabelle, for that return, when you spend that kind of money and capital and investing in our networks for connectivity, is what we like to call above the network. And that's really things like video conferencing, embracing the reality that a lot of work environments are hybrid today. So I don't know if we had intuition or not when we bought a company called Blue Jeans, but we kind of did that right before the pandemic or right at the pandemic. So video conferencing and allowing people to still be able to get work done. And then last panel, I heard talk a little bit about security. Really believing in security is above the network play for us with our DDoS services, our network detection and response services, to continue to deal with kind of breach and things that are happening in this environment. So excited, Annabelle. Your question's right on the money. Big capital investment, but running a business to make sure we don't stay too paranoid, to Isabella's point. How can we continue to have a growth narrative to get a return on that investment?
And let's stick with that by how do we get a return on investment and drive that growth, create that value. You've deployed huge amounts of CapEx across your network as Telefonica. Why and where and what are you needing to get out of it in return?
When we are talking about investments and focusing in the corporate segment especially, because the residential one and the access networks are huge investments going further than what we can even imagine. We need to focus on which are the key transformations in the businesses. You have been talking about that, accessing to the cloud. Remote working is another key transformation that we haven't mentioned so much till now. And this is critical regarding network and also the massive IoT and the connectivity of any kind of devices within the enterprises. This is what is driving our investment from our global network perspective. So it takes to us to making available just on-time connectivity to cloud services and from any place to anywhere, wherever the users are, to wherever the information or the application are based. And this has to be done in real time with easy access to the end user, and also looking at the quality of the experience for the applications that users are employing. In that sense, what we have been working for some years are, of course, softwareization of the network, network functions virtualization, automation based in AI, and all these technologies that are also evolving. Also, of course, segment routing and SDCI connectivity to the clouds. This comes from the network, but the key other investment that we are doing, and this is huge and this is really transformative for us like telcos, is the user experience. We cannot do this as we have been doing for years, from the network to the user. We need to do this from the user to the network. And this is the real different way in which we will find those use cases and that demand and that return on investment.
Thank you. And at this point, I'm going to reveal your predictions, because all four of you supplied your predictions for the next 12 months. They're highly relevant to this conversation because it's all about network transformation. Perfect. So, Eric, I'm going to start with you. Let's leave us the critical work that we're doing on diversity, inclusion, and belonging for a second. Let's not steal that thunder. You raise an important point here around partnerships. So what partnerships do you think we can create? Where are we going to drive that growth? Where's the ROI coming from?
You know, Annabelle, great point as we look at the continued growth that we're looking for in this particular segment. And one of the predictions I called out is how do we get back to a growth narrative within the wholesale industry, in the wholesale space? I mean, every research report you look at will talk about a minus 5% year-over-year decline in revenue streams. Our belief is that that doesn't have to be the way it actually plays itself out. Because once again, if you invest in the infrastructure like what we're doing in the wireline space, even with our fiber deployments, we have a project we call One Fiber, where basically we get outside of the old Verizon ILEC footprint of, say, the Northeast Corridor, and we provide it on a nationwide U.S. basis. Exciting opportunity with fiber and data center connectivity and the fiber deployment we're doing across our One Fiber program, once again, taking advantage of the wireline and what we can do in that particular space. So we're excited about that. To your point about collaboration, I'm a big player in partnerships and collaborations. When I first took over the Verizon organization, we called ourselves Global Wholesale. But we changed the name to Verizon Partner Solutions for a reason. And it was all about the collaboration and partnership in the industry. Clearly, I'm going to play and invest to be a strong network connectivity player. At the same time, when we look for some of the things that we do over the top in our network or partnerships that we do with Microsoft, we're doing at AWS in this particular space, we're continuing to find partnerships as a big player. Even as we roll out our new services and partnerships we do with Sienna, for example, Infinera, looking at those collaborations. So as we define our swim lane, how do we partner with folks that have strength in other swim lanes, and we bring a better solution to the industry at the end of the day? That's where we really see that continued collaboration and partnership as we combine strengths of different enterprises and entities and companies so that we can roll out and meet the customer requirements that we all have in the industry.
Right, and it's not just partnerships in other parts of the ecosystem, it's partners between us as carriers, right? Rolf, talk us through your prediction. When do you think we're going to see the first inter-carrier relationships? And that, I mean, that's a huge shift for the industry. Why is it important from an API perspective?
So when we talk APIs, I think the whole industry is talking about APIs. We are currently talking network APIs. And we always talk about revolutions in the market. We, as carriers, we always like to talk about revolutions that take place in the space of the hyperscalers, like AI, like metaverse. But in the end, there is currently a silent revolution going on in our network, and this comes from 5G standalone, which is open to network APIs. So our prediction is that we will see the first network APIs being live within the next 12 months. And we also predict that we will see inter-carrier relationships for these APIs. Both is very important, and both will bring completely new value to our customers, to our markets. And we will see also a revolution on the service side, because there are many, many examples right now how these network APIs are creating a much better customer experience and new business models.
Exactly, and standardization is the key word, right? We need to have that piece in place. So as a GLF, we signed an MOU with MEF. We formally endorsed their LSO Sonata network exposure APIs a couple of months ago. Emmanuel, you're also deeply involved in the camera open gateway work with the GSMA. How are you looking at APIs within Orange?
Well, we are really preparing for what the prediction that Rolf is presenting today. But the issue with APIs is a question of scale, because the users of these APIs will like to have full coverage of a country, of a region, of a continent, of the world, and this is not something that we have natively as a telco group. So what we need to build is this scale, and that's why there are these initiatives, industry initiatives with the GSMA or the MEF, in order to have standardized APIs or platforms of distribution of those APIs to the developers, for example, or the hyperscalers.
And Annabelle, I was going to add, because I agree with Rolf and Emmanuel so much on this one, as Verizon has partnered with MEF and the TM Forum. And our belief is if we're going to scale as an industry, we can't continue to build out like proprietary APIs, and we've got to get more to scale by doing a more centralized standards-based approach. So we're excited about the work that we're doing in this particular space because we believe it's going to help scale the industry that much faster. And by collaborating with partners like us on the stage and the panels you've had today, if we can all kind of standardize toward those, once again, we ought to be able to get there faster. And back to the point that I feel Emmanuel made, we know that this digital infrastructure transformation is real. And we all need to invest in that particular transformation for ease of business because we make this easier for our customers as well as our partners through these API links.
And let's stick with collaboration for a moment. So for those in the audience, they may not be aware, Orange, Telefonica, PCCW Global and Deutsche Telekom recently delivered a proof of concept around IoT latency for roaming. Rolf, Baye, Emmanuel, talk us through how that work went. Rolf, your team led the get-go. What did you do and how are you looking at it from a product monetization perspective?
Maybe I kick it off. We started our discussion here on the stage with end-to-end quality of service, global end-to-end quality of service, which we don't have today, which we don't have in the field of roaming. So today you have to understand that roaming is not only best effort, also the majority of the traffic is always steered back to the home network. So this creates, is slowing down the speed, it creates slower latencies. So this we have improved with this collaboration by creating together Telefonica, PCCW, and Emmanuel and myself with a POC where we have created direct interconnect. And with this, we could even cut the latency by half. Yeah, so really going down into the critical speed that we need for critical IoT. So everything we are talking about is not so much the human traffic anymore, it's about the IoT traffic. And IoT, you have to differentiate between massive IoT, where quality of service is not critical, and critical IoT, like, for example, telemetry of cars. We as Deutsche Telekom, we are serving BMW, Mercedes, Volvo, all on the IoT side. And for the telemetry worldwide, where the cars are shipped, latency is really key. And here I'm not talking yet about autonomous driving, where it will be, of course, much more important. So this was, for me, a proof point how we could, first of all, collaborate, how we could create a quality of service between 4 carriers. And we're also strongly believing that this is creating kind of gravity so that more carriers are going to join. I'm looking in the direction of Verizon, making this real. Yeah.
Emmanuel, what made this collaboration so successful? How did we work together? I mean, it's something that's unique to us in a carrier industry. We have to work together to deliver a network experience. But what made this particular POC work for you?
Well, I think basically it was a quite simple idea. We had a few number of players which were convinced by this hypothesis. We didn't try to have everybody around the table. We started the 4 of us, and we had a very strong team together working on that. And finally, we did it. It was simple. The intuition was quite obvious, but we demonstrated that it works, and that paves the way for developing new services and new offers for the future.
And Baye, I know you weren't deeply involved in the POC itself. However, you've seen the results. You know what we did. How are Telefonica thinking about this from a product perspective? Is there monetization? Is there value that we can create from this type of low latency roaming product?
This is, I think, our next challenge, how we are going to take this into market, how we are going to create use cases, how we are going to monetize it, because the results are there. and this is the next step that we need to take within the working group.
And Verizon, Eric, are you going to join us?
I heard the pressure there.
It always works.
Exactly. Pure pressure. No, it absolutely makes sense. We're aligned directionally exactly where it's going. So look forward to kind of getting underneath this and understanding how to accept Ralph's challenge.
Right.
Thank you.
And for you, I mean, look, collaboration is a broader topic beyond the POC. I mean, we need it to deliver any type of future experiences that we had in that long list of 11 capabilities and requirements. Where do you think we start? How do we collaborate? Are there forums? How do we do that, Eric?
Yeah, I'm a continued believer that the forums are a great way to do it. And let's start with our own Global Leaders Forum. The fact that you have 35 plus carriers there representing that work so that we can talk about interoperability and the things that we need to do to invest in the future. So, and then the GLF has gone even beyond just the 35 members, as Annabelle has created the GLF community, where a lot more folks beyond just the direct board can actually join into these dialogues and conversations to help make certain we continue to push scale in a greater stream. And then, as I said, clearly we're members with MEF and TM Forum. So I truly believe that these industry conferences and forum allow us to get educated, and with education we can make more informed decisions and therefore help scale in the industry that much quicker.
And events like this too, right? We need to come together, we need to go face to face. Luckily, the pandemic is in the rearview mirror for now. I'm not sure if any of you wanted to go to any more virtual conferences. I certainly didn't. But Rolf, Emmanuel, collaboration, what do you think's needed? And is there more that we can be doing? Let's start with you, Emmanuel.
Well, actually, collaboration is really a must-have. I was mentioning the question of scale, and that we need to deliver. And Rolf was talking about the global platform for connectivity that we need to provide to the market together. And if we don't collaborate, we will not be on time. Maybe we will do it, but not on time. So the question is how fast we can go, and to do it fast, we need to make sure that we interoperate our connectivity platforms with the right standard APIs, standard interfaces, standard processes, end-to-end view, that like what we did with the POC on a local breakout. So that's really what's needed, and we need to continue working. We do it already, but this is also the purpose of the Tomorrow's Telco initiative, is really to accelerate on this cooperation.
And let's move away from the network for a second, because another key area for collaboration is around our people. How do we work together to deliver that inclusive environment for our people? How do we create an industry where people want to stay, they want to come, they want to thrive? So with that, Eric, I'm going to invite you to go to the podium and launch this year's annual DIB report. Talk us through it.
So I'm excited this piece of the journey as well, because one of the biggest things I think the Global Leaders Forum has done, clearly dealing with things like fraud, network security, transformation, kind of customer experience, we decided that equally as important that we care for the people and the people part of what we do each and every day. And why not in our industry continue to be a lead, particularly knowing kind of where we stand in this particular space. So there's 3 data points I'd like to share with you, upcoming slide. Clearly at ITW each year, this being our 4th year, we have put forward our industry, what we call first in our industry, white paper in the area of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Because once again, as we look at the customers we all serve, and all of us in the room, clearly we understand that diversity kind of is the right thing to do, but beyond the right thing to do, it's the right thing for business. So this first slide that we could go back to hits to the point of how do we measure our first 3 years of white papers. The first one was on gender imbalance, second one was on racial inequity, and the third one was on inclusivity. And how do we measure how we've come over this 3-4 year period of time making progress in those areas? So that's point 1 in the research that you'll see from no more than 55, 56 page white paper in this area. So measuring our progress to date. Point 2, has anything changed because of the pandemic? Hybrid working is a big thing. Now, Verizon's about 125,000 people, and I never thought hybrid working would be a reality, but we got 90% of our workforce from the pandemic are working from home 90% of the time, 50% of the time, 20% of the time. And now we're saying, hey, how do we care for people working at home as well as working in the office and support both of those infrastructures? And then the third one is what we're really finding is upskilling and reskilling our talent. This clearly is an evolution change that's taking place in our industry. We can go to the next slide. So the next slide, and I have one more after this, kind of sets the stage on this. We clearly have like 89% of our respondents who continue to see diversity, inclusion, and belonging as a strategic priority. Looking and operating and being like our customers is where we make a differentiation point for ourselves. 36% of the respondents in this said, once again, they lead in at least one level of diversity axis, whether that's race, religion, sexism, ageism, you name it. We want to make certain we continue to be an inclusive society in the work that we do every day and be like the customers we serve. 40%, once again, progress is made in respondents that are highly inclusive. And then the last one is 86% of the respondents, so that's a 16% improvement year over year, have looked at progress in the area of diversity. And then my last slide, and kind of bring it home for Annabelle's question, setting this up, is a great work that shows that, and here's the wake-up call. We're finding from all the data in this space, just call it 60-some thousand international employees in this particular industry that we have, anywhere from 30 to at times 40% of your employee base will need to be reskilled, will have to be upskilled due to the evolution, moving from legacy telco to more software-defined and cloud-based infrastructures going forward. How do we make certain that we don't leave anyone behind in this journey and they can embrace the things that we've talked about in the conference? So I'm excited the fact that we embrace the fact we must measure our success. How are we moving forward from a diversity, inclusion, and belonging? 2, how do we make certain we don't lose ground with the pandemic and our hybrid working environment? And then 3rd, how do we care for our talent? Upskill, reskill our talent so that we can continue to evolve global connectivity in this industry. Hope that helps, Annabelle.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you for leading our DIB working group so ably for a number of years. We're going to be delving into some of the other data points in a little bit more depth at the Global Women in Telco and Tech morning, tomorrow morning. Please join us. But this is an enormous number, right? 20,000 people in the next 3 years are going to need upskilling or reskilling. How are we going to do that? And what are the drivers, right? Because it's not as bad as it sounds. A lot of it is around how the industry is transforming and what we're asking from our people to be able to deliver. Rolf, you're deeply involved in helping younger talent learn, change. What are you looking at from a DT perspective here?
Yeah, picking up what Eric has said, this reskilling is, of course, a big topic. And on top, of course, also hiring people with a different skill set. I think this are the key ingredients for our success in the future. What we are doing as Deutsche Telekom is, on one hand side, we have great MBA programs, so more than a dozen of our people have been running through that. In my department, we have a very specific talent program. We talk about talent, everybody knows the shining stars of the company, but you always have also hidden stars in your departments. And it's very much about activating hidden stars. And therefore, we created a program where they are activated via mentoring, via coaching. It's very much about social intelligence, but also about very specific skill sets. On top, of course, you cannot only embrace your talents, you also need to embrace the whole workforce. Therefore, we have what we call strategy days, where we are activating the whole departments, everybody. We have digital and Innovation Fridays, where we are leading through all these programs. You mentioned women. It's also very important that we also encourage our female talents and colleagues to go the extra mile, to go up the career. So we have a women network where they have also a specific training and exchange. So people and culture, diversity and inclusion, I think for each telco is a significant must, to drive it forward. And it's not a one-time effort, it's a huge journey on a day-to-day basis.
And that's key, right? By 36% have seen progress and believe they're highly inclusive. That's not 100%, right? So how do we get there? Well, what are you looking at from a Telefonica perspective? And equally, you're a woman in this industry. What do you think we need to do to improve that inclusion?
I think we have been taking very hard steps in the last years, but I think this panel is a good example of the situation of the industry. We are 2 women out of 8 panelists, and 3 with you, Annabelle, but I don't know how many moderators you have as women here in the ITW. So I think this is a good example of where we are right now. Being a woman in this industry has a first challenge when you start studying, because there are not so women, at least in the markets where we are based, that decide to take these technological studies. This is the first step that we are trying to promote within the society. This is a very key element that we need all to take into the schools and into the university. That's a little bit late. I think this is one key aspect that we are addressing. Regarding challenges, having reference is a huge challenge. Being the only woman or only whatever within a meeting room is a huge challenge. And trying to understand why you are not the selected one one time and the other one, this is a huge challenge that tests your resilience and your decisions to be there and to be a reference for the women that are in the starting points of their careers. I think that the way to get to that success, there is no special recipe, but focus, purpose, hard work, and resilience. And I think that from companies we need still to do a lot of work to make this a reality.
Eric, I can see you want to chip in here. Go for it.
No, I just wanted to add the point relative to what we've seen in Verizon. We created a program we call Talent Works. And a part of the Talent Works program is the business units partnering with human resources corporately to really look at things that how do you attract talent into the industry? 2, how do you develop talent once we have it in the industry? And then 3rd, how do we inspire that talent to want to stay in the industry and make a difference? So I'm really pleased at that collaboration taking place and you owning that at a Fortune 30 corporate level. So that's important. Talent Works. The second part, and Maria mentioned this, I mean, clearly the population is about 51 to 50% female. But if we look at C-level positions in the telecom industry, you're not seeing 51, 52% female in C-level leadership. So we're looking at programs in Verizon that we've done, Women of the World, et cetera. We invest, we assign mentors, we make sure you get the training and development. We've seen stats, for example, when there's a job rec open and a gentleman will apply, say there's 10 requirements, he may have 6 or 7 and will apply for the job. A female will have 7 or 8 and will not apply for the job. So once again, trying to encourage that you move forward and you step out with the understanding that you'll learn and you'll lead in those particular positions. So we're excited about the work there. And then the third point I would put in is the point around racial equity and people of color, because we've had to do a lot of work in this area as well. As you look at the percentage of the diversity of our society and our world, and trying to make certain we're having as many opportunities for people of color across the board, and trying to make certain we have employee resource groups, as well as training and development with Harvard and Yale programs to make certain we're investing in people of color to make sure they also are getting reskilled and upskilled so they can take on more leadership positions in the telecom industry.
Right, and let's finish on a note of optimism because we're getting close to time. Looking around the room, there are young people who are coming into the industry. We want them, we want to keep them. You are senior leaders, long tenured. What is it that you love about what you do? And in a few short words, why should they come and why should they stay in our wonderful world of international telecoms? Rolf, let's start with you.
Every day in our industry, you can do or die, picking up your words. So it's always exciting. It's always change that is required. You can never sleep silently. You always have to wake up the next day. What is the next challenge to come? So if you like this, yeah, everybody is welcome in this industry. And I must say, for me, each and every day in this industry was big fun, being a big challenge as well.
Big fun, big challenge. Emmanuel, what are your words of wisdom?
No, I think the meaning of what we do is really compelling, and what we are connecting, the people with the services, the companies with the services, and which we enable, and we have seen that during the COVID crisis, is that we are enable the world to turn. And that should be a real attractive for the new generations who are clearly in search for meaning of what they do and meaning in their work. And that's the meaning I find in my everyday job.
Bye.
Yes, for me, let me talk about social responsibility. New generations are very involved. They are really focused in transforming the world. And what I can say is that I've seen the world being transformed by our industry. The ones that come from the 2000 years, we have seen how the internet has appeared and how it has been transforming all our lives. We are coming into the metaverse, which is the next big, huge step that will transform our lives. And this is the opportunity for all the young people to be part of this new story.
Eric, take us to the finish line.
All right, finish line. I stay excited about this industry. I've been in this industry for 37 years, and it's constantly a learning experience. As a father of a 30-year-old daughter who finished her doctorate in business administration, a 25-year-old daughter that graduates from neuroscience forensic next month in Denver, and my son, second year in college, I want to encourage them because I can see from millennial to Generation Z, X, and all of those alphabets, the importance of making sure we show a great roadmap. And to be very candid, my point is I want to make certain that this type of a panel continues to look like this type of a panel going forward, and therefore continued investment in our future and next generations, and helping them see opportunities in STEM and STEAM, and the importance will continue to make sure our industry evolves and we don't get left behind.
Thank you. So to summarize, we have fun, we keep the world connected, we deliver with purpose, and we're changing. So with that, I would like to thank our incredible lineup of speakers that we've had today. So we started with Elisabetta and Jonathan. We then included Obaid and Chris, Emmanuel, Rolf, Baye, Eric. Please join me in saying thank you to all of you. And that's the end of the ITW Keynote Chat Show.